The Knesset voted to form a committee to look into the activities and funding of radical left-wing Israeli organizations. The initiative, proposed by the Israel Beitenu party, passed by a vote of 47 to 16. IBA's Eli Wogelanter brings us more.
The Knesset voted 41-17 after a stormy session yesterday afternoon to establish an investigative committee to determine if radical left-wing Israeli organizations are funded by foreign countries or by other groups with links to terrorism. The Knesset House Committee will decide in the coming days the parameters of the probe and then return the proposal to the Knesset floor for final approval. The committee will be chaired by Likud MK Danny Danon. Some of the organizations singled out during the discussion included Yesh Din, Machzom Watch, B'Tselem, Adala, and Breaking the Silence. Many of the organizations to be investigated have long been reported to be receiving monies from the European Union and/or Arab countries. An open letter signed by 16 Israeli human rights organizations read, "Investigate us all, we have nothing to hide. You tried to besmirch us in the past, it did not work then, and it will not work this time." Israel Beitenu MK Fanya Kirschenbaum, who initiated the inquiry, said the left-wing NGO's efforts to hamper Israel's right to defend itself are very grave, and the Knesset must get to the bottom of the issue. Reaction to the vote was swift from both sides of the aisle, with left-wing activists charging the Knesset with McCarthyism and of conducting a witch hunt. Meretz MK Nitzan Horowitz asked Attorney General Yehuda Weinstein to determine if the idea is even legal, contending that the extreme right is trying to silence legitimate criticism. Knesset Speaker Ruby Rivlin of the Likud opposed the inquiry committee, saying the body responsible for investigating the organizations that collect information on IDF soldiers is the police and law enforcement agencies, not the Knesset. National Union MK Michael Ben-Ari referred to members of the leftist organizations as traitors who must be prosecuted at any cost. The rightist lawmaker called the leftist organizations germs and enemies of Israel and equated them to Hamas and Hezbollah. In addition to the mass support from right-wing factions, the Knesset proposal was also backed by 3 members of Kadima, which heads the opposition. Eli Wogelanter, IBA News.
Gerald Steinberg is head of the Israel-based human rights watchdog organization NGO Monitor. IBA's Eli Wogelanter asked Steinberg what he thought of the Knesset's vote.
I'm not thrilled with the way this was done. This should not be a partisan issue. It shouldn't be taken by one party. This is certainly a consensus issue that Israelis across the board are really concerned about. The abuse of human rights, the exploitation of international law, the role of people like Judge Richard Goldstone and all the NGOs that support him should be a broad issue. And I'm a little bit afraid that this was hijacked for political purposes.
How many organizations do we know for a fact are funded by foreign organizations or countries or?
I wish we knew that. The problem is that the real parliamentary investigation should be in the European Union. It should not be. They spend so much money, and most of it is done in secret. We don't know. We can guess. I'm guessing there are about 50 Israeli organizations, roughly. There could be more. But there are hundreds of groups, at least 100, 150. And the amount of money could be well over 500 million shekels a year. And the problem is that this is all done in secret by European, particularly EU and European governments. And this is an expression, the vote in the Knesset was an expression of frustration. These governments should not be doing this, should not be manipulating Israeli democracy and supporting the Durban process of trying to demonize Israel.
How much power does the Knesset have in this kind of an investigation to look into other countries or the EU as to what they're exactly funding?
Well, I think that's part of the problem, is that this has got to be done on the basis of what we know within the Israeli context. Where are these organizations getting their funding? But we're going to find out pretty quickly that there are a lot of Palestinian and American and British-based groups, Oxfam, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and many, many more that are involved in this political war, this delegitimization of Israel, lawfare, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, all of which are anti-democratic and anti-human rights.
These organizations would argue that, yes, they're left-wing, that's the way they perceive things, and they are only exposing what they see as human rights failures, and that what's happening right now, this Knesset vote, is actually an example of McCarthyism.
This kind of language on both the far left and the far right has no place in this process. This is about the public's right to know. It's about who's promoting political processes that have a huge impact on Israel. I would argue negative. They can argue positive. That's a fair debate. What they're really saying is we don't want any criticism. We are anti-democratic because we don't want a debate on this. It should have been done at the civil society level. The fact that Europe has stonewalled and that these NGOs are playing this game of mudslinging with completely absurd terms like McCarthyism has led to this concern concern in the Knesset. And I'm hoping that these organizations will lower the tone and become transparent and be part of the democratic process rather than using the term democracy or abusing it in such a negative way.
And the Knesset voted for such a committee. Now they're going to decide what the parameters of their investigation can be. What can we expect from that and how far they can go?
It's going to be difficult to see because, in fact, much of the money, much of the process comes out outside of the Israeli framework. So I think that we may find that, in fact, this is more about putting the issue on the agenda and getting the Europeans to start dealing with this seriously. When the Dutch foreign minister finds out about his own government's funding for electronic intifada because of an NGO Monitor research report and a Jerusalem Post article, and he doesn't know about this, and there are hundreds of examples of this throughout Europe, there's something fundamentally wrong in Europe. That's where the anti-democracy process needs to be addressed.